This is HR in Review, a podcast dedicated to HR thought leadership, actionable advice, and all the latest developments in human resource management.
Hello and welcome back to another episode of HR in Review. I'm Amelia Brand, your host for today, and in this episode we will be discussing all things neurodiversity in the workplace. Today I'm joined by Andrew Jones, CEO of Agility in Mind, who uses strategic experience and operational skills to make a difference in business strategy and operation. We explore exactly what it means when we say someone is neurodivergent, and also dive into what the research by Agility in Mind shows about the representation and inclusion of neurodivergent individuals within the workplace. We also explore how managers can support neurodivergent workers even if they're working remotely. Hi Andrew, welcome. It's great to have you on.
Well, thank you very much. Yeah, it's an absolute pleasure to be here.
Great. So today we're going to be talking about neurodiversity in the workplace, exploring why the support for neurodiverse individuals lags far behind when it comes to representation. We'll also talk a bit about some of the benefits that neurodiverse individuals actually do bring to the workplace. So, firstly, would you like to tell our listeners a little bit about yourself and the research you're going to be speaking about?
Yeah, of course. So my name is Andrew Jones, and I run a company called Agility in Mind. Now, you might think that that has a real connection to what we're talking about in terms of neurodiversity, but the reason that I set up Agility in Mind and called it that is when we're dealing with organisations, when we're talking about change, what we're trying to do is to keep agility in mind when we're achieving outcomes, but most importantly, when we want to see changes in organisation, it starts with the way people think about what could be done and about where they might want to get to. So it always starts with a thought process. So that's where we came from. And the reason that we're particularly interested in neurodiversity, but more broadly, sort of inclusion, diversity, and equity in organisations, is that what we see is that successful organisations are those ones that recognise that it's people at the centre, and there is absolute diversity right across populations within organisations and, of course, within society. So we start with people.
Great. So to kick off the podcast, it might be worth asking you, how do you define neurodiversity?
Well, I mean, that is a really good question. And I don't claim to be an expert in terms of neurodiversity. And it's certainly a way of thinking about people who perhaps might be categorized in some way with some recognized diagnosis or condition or way of thinking. And I have a bit of a challenge, really, in terms of sometimes about thinking about neurodiverse people versus neurotypical people. And the reason that I say that there's a challenge there is because I don't think you can categorize everybody else as being neurotypical, because there's such a diversity of thinking. And even if people haven't got some sort of recognized way of putting them into that sort of neurodiverse category, people do think in different ways. So first of all, I think it's just recognizing that people do think in different ways. Now, of course, there are certain things that would place people into that neurodiverse category. So it might be things like autism, for example, which is perhaps one that is a bit more understood in terms of, that it's there and it's commonplace in society. But really, it's the way that people think and the diversity of way people think that sometimes it can be sort of a bit more extreme, but certainly because it's about thinking, it tends to be a lot more hidden. So perhaps when we see it within behaviors, and that's how we might categorize it. But really, it is about it's about what happens in the mind, I guess.
But I think it is fair to say that neurodiversity is lagging far behind when it comes to representation and inclusion. So what do you think companies are doing to address this?
Well, the research that we did find that it was something only like 4% of FTSE 100 companies had specific initiatives to address it. Compare that to things like LGBTQ plus initiatives, where
Mm.
it's getting on for sort of 50% of those organisations, whereas most FTSE 100 companies, sort of 99% plus, had clear statements around inclusivity. So it
Mm.
would seem that in general, um, things aren't really being done to address neurodiversity within the workplace. And I think it's because it's perhaps one of those things that, because it's difficult to see, it's difficult to do something about it. If it's difficult to see, it's difficult to understand. And
Mm.
that might be the thing that sort of holds people back.
So do you think that's one of the major obstacles then, stopping managers from doing better then?
Yeah, because I mean, as soon as you talk about managers, you are also
Mm.
talking about people. You just because they've got a position in an organisation or a particular job title doesn't stop them from being individuals. And one of the challenges that we have just generally is developing empathy.
Mm.
Seeing things from other people's perspectives, and because sort of neurodiversity, as I said before, isn't necessarily seen. It's quite difficult for people to start to understand what is it practically that I can do. We tend to be very practical in addressing these things. So I think that's probably the obstacle. It's unseen. So why do we need to do something about it?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. So let's move on then to discuss the workplace strengths of neurodiverse individuals. What do you think some of the benefits are of having neurodiverse staff in your workforce? And, I guess what kind of strengths do you think neurodiverse employees bring to the table?
If you have any comments on the HR in Review podcast, would like to suggest a topic or speaker, or provide other feedback, you can contact us using the email podcast@hrreview.co.uk. We look forward to hearing from you.
Well, I think first of all, recognizing that there is diversity of thinking is
Yeah.
the starting point. And I really like some of the things that Matthew Syed writes about, for example, and about where great ideas come from. And great
Mm.
ideas, great innovations come quite often from a clash of thinking. Seeing things from different perspectives. And it might be, it might be, for example, within music, clashing of different genres of music, you can get something that's quite interesting, and something that can be sort of differentiated in that market. And there are plenty of examples of that. So where you get a clash of thoughts, a clash of ideas, those things can be quite rich in the innovation that they bring. But I think there's the other aspect, is that because we do have a neurodiversity within the population, there's a real danger if we have people all thinking or seemingly thinking in the same way as in an organization. You really don't
Mm.
get that representation. So if you're only seeing things from one perspective, and that is only your perspective, you really won't be able to reach the breadth of thinking and needs within society.
Yeah, I mean, I guess kind of digging further into that then, do you think you could outline some ways employers can ensure that neurodiversity is actually celebrated within the workplace? And I guess, embedded within that, how do you think managers can actually build this inclusivity into their company and take an agile approach to the change?
So do you think it starts with the people that you've got in the organization, and really trying to raise awareness first of all?
Mm.
Um, and in terms of celebrating, I think to start with, let's get a little bit more acceptance. That because somebody thinks differently doesn't mean that they're a bad person, or they're not good at their job, or or whatever conclusion people come to. So let's first of all just recognize that because people are thinking differently doesn't mean to say that they're necessarily different in their needs. When it comes to celebrating, let's try and find ways within the sort of the regular events within organizations, whether those are meetings or social events, to make those more accessible to people that think in different ways. For example, I do remember going to quite a well-known global company just a short while ago. And I was impressed with the head of people in that organization. You know, she was trying to bring a sort of a fresh spirit to it, and it was all going to be about the people and about building this culture of inclusivity. And one of the initiatives she drove was every lunchtime they would all stop together, they would all sit down together, and they would all have lunch together, and they would talk together and chat. And for her, as a very sort of outgoing, gregarious sort of person, I could see how that would be wonderful. But for other people in the organization, you know, let's recognize that not everybody really wants to do that, and not everybody feels comfortable doing that. So I think when it comes to celebrating, you know, let's just recognize that different people have different ways of doing it in the first place.
Yeah, that's actually really super interesting. I guess, not only acknowledging but accepting differences as well. But let's talk about the majority of the workforce then. Um, can you perhaps offer some insights into how managers and employers can engage, the other areas of the workforce to ensure that they are helping to create and implement this change? Not only, I know we just spoke about acknowledging and accepting, but do you think about any other ways?
So we recognise that each organisation is unique in terms of where it's come from, where it's going, what it does, the people within it, and the individuals are unique in themselves. Beginning with inclusivity in mind, so making sure that with those events, we don't put up barriers for people getting involved. When it comes to making changes and trying to find that, making that inclusive in itself, so that rather than it being seen as an HR initiative, for example, let's try to make it a whole organization initiative, so that we get sort of cross-functional teams that think about change and think about taking that out and getting the conversations going across the organization. I mean, we do believe in working incrementally, trying things, doing things in small steps, making sure that we're getting feedback each time. Not everything is going to work, so trying small things and finding out whether they work or not is a great way to sort of de-risk and make sure that it's more of a journey rather than a destination that we're going on.
Great. Okay, so one of my last questions for you. Obviously, the working world as we know it has fundamentally changed with so many more working in a remote model. So, what sort of challenges do you think arise when supporting neurodiverse employees who work remotely or perhaps in a hybrid model?
So the sort of the issue of remote working, actually, there will be pros and cons. There will be swings and roundabouts for neurodiverse people, but for broader population in organizations. I think the real challenge is managers and them really understanding their role now, because I think that's probably a bigger challenge in terms of the change that's taking place. So managers, I think, perhaps have now got more flexibility to find ways to keep people included in the process. But I think they really need to be thinking honestly about their role and changing from managers through to leaders, and trying to find ways to lead people through, trust people to be doing to be working effectively, rather than feeling that they've got to control what people are doing. So I think the cultural elements of that are going to be the big things that we need to address.
Great. Okay. Well, this was super interesting. Thank you so much, Andrew, for coming on. It was great to have you.
Thank you ever so much for your time and for inviting me.
The HR in Review podcast is brought to you by hrreview.co.uk. hrreview.co.uk is a website dedicated to human resources and related professionals. News items are posted daily, together with analysis looking in depth at topical HR issues. You can sign up for our range of specialist newsletters at hrreview.co.uk/sign-up, and follow us on Twitter at hrreview, or join us on LinkedIn and Facebook. Thank you for listening.